we are grateful and honored to be living on and sharing the natural beauty of the traditional ancestral and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. We appreciate their past centuries of stewardship, have preserved these beautiful areas for our enjoyment today, and acknowledge the need to work with them to safeguard these lands and all their inhabitants for future generations to appreciate.
It's been such a welcoming place, and I appreciate it very much. And it's, you know, we do a lot of work on Southern Vancouver Island, so to have a chance to sort of stretch out a bit geographically and make more contact with people in Vancouver is really nice. And I see a few folks that I know, including my wonderful neighbor, Nancy, which is really special to have her here. And, but a lot of new people, which is wonderful. So I'm going to share my screen. So I just threw this in a second ago, if I'm being totally honest, because when Sandy, you had talked about Satin Flowers and making that visit to Saanich, and then that connection to the namesake of our nursery now, which is Satinflower Nurseries. And that's underscored by native plant seeds and consulting, which are sort of the three focus areas of our business. And we previously were Saanich native plants and have been doing growing in Machosen and doing growing in Cobble Hill. And we decided to change our name to sort of capture that and not necessarily be describing something that's a specific spot. And satin flowers are a very special early spring flower. They're flowering now. They haven't quite hit their peak, but they've definitely started up. And they tell the story of place, of how our unique ecologies lend themselves to unique flora and all of the wonderful interactions that come along with that in terms of wildlife. And so we decided to call ourselves Satinflower Nurseries as part of that narrative, and also because we, of course, love these flowers just for their innate beauty. But though, yeah, when Sandy mentioned those, if you're not familiar with them, this is what satin flowers look like. Then Dennis had been talking about June plum, ozoberry, previously sometimes the common name being Indian plum, but that is less desirable now. So I encourage you to try out June plum or ozoberry or Umlaria cerasiformis. That was a good conversation about how Latin names are unchanging. So you can communicate very clearly what entity you're speaking of, where of course there's a variety of common names. So it's always up to yourselves, of course, whatever you're most comfortable with, but those are, you know, reasons to consider using Latin names when you can as well, that we're all on the same page. Dennis had mentioned about it being a dioecious plant. So when a plant's dioecious, the males and female flowers are on different plants. In contrast, a monoecious plant would have the males and females on the same plant. So with June plums, they're on different plants. And right now is a fabulous time to go test yourself, go try out your botanical skills. They're in full flower. You'd be looking for the female parts with the female, so that upper left one, and then the bottom right where you can see the anthers there, all pollen packed. And usually the male shrubs will have more flowers than the female shrubs, and the male shrubs tend to be more common. So you might go around and find a whole bunch of male shrubs and have a little bit more trouble finding the female shrubs, but you will. And of course, like all as you might expect, it's the female plants that will go on to bear fruit. So the fruits start off just this magnificent sort of fluorescent color, orange color, and then they'll turn to a dark blue when they're mature. You can see in the back, a couple of them are starting to change in this photo. And certainly a delightful plant for birds. And that's just a picture of the cotyledons, or the first leaves when they come up. So they're very distinctive. If you find these plate-like leaves, that's them. So there's no other cotyledon that really looks quite like this. They're quite distinctive. So a lot of what we're talking about tonight is just the simple message that you're an important part of conserving and restoring nature. I think by the nature of your group, you already know that. And that's ultimately what our nursery is about. We really look to inspire and empower people to connect with nature. And we try to do that through native plants and learning about native plants and all of the world kind of that surrounds native plants. There's just so many things, of course, that native plants are the foundation for. Our nursery started about 10 years ago, and we had been, James, my husband, and myself had been working on restoration work at a local farm called Halliburton Farm. And ultimately that's where we ended up making our nursery home, and where we're still operating our nursery out of Halliburton Farm to this day. And lucky for us, the board of directors there let us lease out a parcel in what was just a grassy front yard. And that is still where our storefront is a small front yard of the farmhouse. And we do growing there, but we have expanded our growing because we needed more space. And I'll show you a picture in a minute of like part of our new growing spot. We have a wonderful team of employees. So right now we have about 10. And doing a whole range of things. We have people helping with consulting, with our seed growing and harvesting, with customer service, with everything from bookkeeping and accounting to like growing the plants, of course. So it's just a wonderful team of people who bring a range of talents and expertise that has just made the nursery grow beyond our wildest dreams. These are just a few pictures from the nursery. We grow about 200 different species of plants at any given time, and that can fluctuate. We do everything from seed, so we can have a bad, mess something up or have a bad season with something, and it might be, another few years until we have that plant again, because things can be slow to bring them to maturity, especially when we're doing them from seed. This is second group. So this photo here was from our location at Halliburton Farm. And then 2 years ago, we started propagating plants in Metchosin as well. And that's what we've been really busy with the past couple years, is getting seed fields established in Metchosin. We're looking to welcome customers to this site as well. We're about 1.5 years behind where we thought we were going to be. So I've stopped saying when we're going to open. We're just doing our best, and it's kind of slow going, but fast at the same time. And we're doing things like putting native hedgerows in and planting rows of camas, and starting to propagate there, and just a whole bunch of things going on. This building in the upper left is a barn that we spent a good part of last year working on, because we're trying to make for the first time to have some kind of indoor space for customers to come and like have transactions with us, because up until now, we've done everything totally outside with customers at our other location. We've never had any indoor space before with them. So that will be lovely. And it will also give us a chance to display some of our seeds. So in terms of the variety, we grow wildflowers, trees, shrubs, grasses, sedges, rushes. We've been very focused on Garryoak ecosystem species because of where we are. We're on Southern Vancouver Island in the heart of Canada's Garryoak ecosystems. And so, of course, that is a huge part of our work focus. We included with our growing operations is native seed. So we do seed blends and seed packets, and all of our growing is without herbicides, pesticides, or chemical fertilizers. And the genetics of our plants are local. So we don't, with our seed, we've started those from wild populations and then go on to propagate them in sort of a farm setting. And that's what ends up being the plants that you come and get from the nursery are all genetically local. These are some images from our native seed fields. So this upper left picture is part of our Cobble Hill seed rows. The sea blush picture, the pink flowers there, is from our Halliburton location. And soon our Metchosin location should be nice and colorful as well. The impetus behind the native seed production is to try to assist in larger scale restoration where seed makes the most sense. So of course, like pots and plugs and larger containers for plants are not as economical and logistically possible if you're trying to restore larger areas. While seed can really make that doable in a lot of cases. And so for our part of the island, we just wanted to contribute to that native seed production and hopefully help in that way. This is a little bit more information about what I mean by genetically local. So if you picture our common camas bed there, and these are actual sites where we collected small amounts of common camas seed that went on to create a patch of common camas. And that patch of common camas is where we collect the seed from that you would buy a seed at the nursery, or where you would where we would start a seed from our patch and then go on to make potted plants. So we would never just collect plants from the wild and resell them or anything like that. While all the same, we can have genetically local plants and honoring the lineages of plants that exist in our area. Collaborating at the nursery with Indigenous people is a critical part of our nursery. And so that includes Indigenous employees, Indigenous contractors who are working along with us, partners where we're in community with people, or people are coming to the nursery and we're just working together on a huge variety of projects. And that is just such an important part, and such a means a lot to me, and makes the work that we do just has elevated that work so much and opened up a lot of learning for myself and different ways of looking at plants and approaching plants and ecology and biology and all those kinds of things. In the consulting aspects of the nursery, we work with a range of people, everything from private landowners to First Nations, nonprofits, large government projects. So we do work with the Ministry of Environment and BC Parks and Parks Canada, with schools. So all the ways you can imagine native plants can be used, we were partnering and doing consulting work with people. So some of these are larger ongoing projects. We've been working in Helliwell Provincial Park since 2015. So James is in some of the meadow habitat there where there was tree encroachment. And so we worked along with our partners with BC Parks and Ministry of Environment and Garry Oak Ecosystem Recovery Team, removed conifer trees and are reestablishing meadow vegetation. And part of this is a recovery project for Taylor's checker spot butterflies. And that's us doing some vegetation monitoring that we do annually. So that would be an example of one of our biological consulting type projects. Here's a school in Metchosin that had disturbed this camas meadow greatly. And this is an example of how our seed can be used. So we, within a year, could have the site looking like this instead of this. And a lot of that is to do with being able to use seed, where you can incorporate natural vegetation quite quickly. And of course, this site isn't, you know, it's not a replacement for what had been here, but it's on a better trajectory than if it had been just reseeded with turf lawn after or whatnot, in terms of diversity for the plants themselves, but also wildlife that has co-evolved with these native plants of our region. Sometimes we're working in like very urban sites, like you're seeing here in this beautiful native plant garden that we planted last year. This is, of course, before we had planted the site. It's at Neathtois, which is part of the Sayout Child and Family Services buildings that you see along the Pat Bay. So we're working on Indigenous plant gardens throughout the whole unit there. And I was just there the other day and it was looking really good. So I'm excited. So maybe sometime when I'm back, hopefully in the future, I can share what that garden turns into. We work with municipalities on rain gardens. So this beautiful rain garden here, this is in its first year after planting, and it's all native plants. There isn't anything non-native. There's things like tufted hairgrass and monkey flowers and slough sedge and checker mallows and meadow barley. And this was with the town of View Royal, where we helped with the plant selection. They did all the planting themselves. They came up with the idea of using all native plants, and we just applaud any municipality who's stretching the boundaries like that and realizing you don't have to necessarily include ornamental plants to have a thriving, beautiful habitat in an urban setting. And then, of course, just a shout out to all those amazing landowners who are going above and beyond with their sense of stewardship and turning, like this is a boulevard example, but using all native plants in their boulevard and kind of, you know, anytime we're consulting on a planting like this, we'll think about what the spot would work well. And so for often with boulevards, we're trying to put lower lying plants that aren't going to creep all over the sidewalk or bump into cyclists or people coming, you know, needing to use a sidewalk. But there are ways of selecting native plants so that they can fit the role that you need. That same landowner who I just showed you the boulevard went ahead and removed all of their lawn and allowed us to seed a native meadow. And that's one of the things that we specialize in is lawn to meadow, like just lawn to meadow, and removing conventional turf grass and instead having a diverse array of native wildflowers, drawing all those pollinators and birds and all that bountiful nature right to the doorsteps of people who are willing to kind of take that leap. in planting meadows, there are just so many benefits. So there's, of course, all those aspects about conserving and restoring biological diversity. And by doing so, it's really about this respect for the unique place wherever you may live, and celebrating that uniqueness. And so I really think that, native plants are just such a big part of that, and deserve our respect. And one of the best ways to do that is through conserving, of course, natural areas, which is critical, and then where you can, planting native plants as well. When Sandy gave her introduction, she spoke very clearly with her territory acknowledgement with regards to Indigenous people. And I thought that was such a beautiful introduction and acknowledgement there. And native plants, of course, are part of that. I see them as an act of reconciliation, and that are important for honoring the stewardship and management activities that Indigenous peoples have had in local ecosystems and continue to have. And for Southern Vancouver Island, Garry Oak ecosystems truly are an ecocultural ecosystem. And doing meadow restoration or thinking about native plants, that is such an important part of that. And with meadows in particular, they're a great way of this patchwork of habitat for wildlife. So you imagine bees and butterflies hopscotching from house to house. In an ideal world, more people would be sort of like doing those things, and there'd be more habitat continuity that was part of this matrix of parks and conserved areas, but also just embedded throughout neighborhoods, because why not? And then, of course, all of the things about, like, just what a great way to learn about nature by just having those things right outside your door. With that neighbor where you've already seen this picture, just kind of showing you midway there after the lawn had been removed, and then we seeded it. And these are just pictures from the meadow, and we planted the camas bulbs, but the rest was seeded, and it was looking like this just this is the second season. So it's going into its third year now, and this was from last spring. And lots of diversity, lots of color, and you can just imagine the bees in there, of course. And I wanted to show you a larger meadow. This one we did with other partners in Victoria. So we had partnered with BC Hydro, Peninsula Stream Society, and Pollinator Partnership Canada. And we had a lot of outstanding volunteers who came and helped us plant and seed. And that was it. I guess that was its second spring, actually. But you can see how much cover. We had worked to use the clay in the soil to our advantage by digging down and compacting some of the clay so we could get some vernal pool habitat and host some unique species and where water is held in the winter. So you can see how the water line there, and that's a popcorn flower that prefers to be underwater in the winter. And later summer, I should say, how vegetation will change, of course, and meadows naturally have that cyclical way. I can't remember why I put this slide. I don't know. I honestly don't know. I have to go ahead and look. I don't know. I like the picture. I have no idea what the message was, but I think it probably had something to do with like approaching growing from different ways, where I don't know how many of you are familiar with plugs, but growing plants in smaller units like this are called plugs. And they're, if you have a half acre to plant and you want to put it, like, these are all California oat grass. If you want to do a bunch of California oat grass or something, putting them in like this is really economical. we're often using a combination of plugs and seeds and pots all together for plantings. And so now I want to go through a suite of plants that are ones you could be thinking about for your own gardens at home. And, you know, aesthetics is one part of it. And there's just an amazing variety of native plants and so much beauty there. But I always want to, you know, send the message too that it's not all about aesthetics, and that when using native plants goes well beyond just the beauty of the plants, but it's all the so that connection to nature that includes, to do with wildlife and how these plants have been here since the last glaciation, co-evolving with the wildlife that's here, and how so many animals depend on these plants for habitat and resources and adequate nutrition, diverse nutrition, all those kinds of things. They're part of the well-being of these animals, and to keep that in mind. So does anyone recognize this one? Maybe put up your hand if you do.
Put up our hand.
So I think I see a few hands there. So that's nodding onion. It's a native, there are several native onions, but this is one of the native onions. And it's a fun one for people to try if they are into edible plants, because the whole plant you can eat. Just like your kitchen onions are an allium, this one's Allium cernuum. You can see the bees on there. So that's, you know, clearly a favorite of native bumblebees. And it like flowers kind of mid-season and is not that high statured. So it's one that I use in tons and different kinds of plantings. But if you're interested in a plant that's kind of lower to mid height, this is a good one. So a boulevard planting or a rock garden. And they tend to like drainage. So that'd be one thing I would say with this. I know, especially with Vancouver having quite a bit more rainfall than here, you would just want to have it somewhere that's a bit better drained. So you can always add a little sand to the soil or put it in some rock, but it's a great plant. So this is Pearly Everlasting. It's in the aster plant family. And I've cherry picked plants out here that occur in your area so that you have a selection of things that actually make sense for a place that gets quite a bit more rainfall than here. So you guys get about double. And we have Pearly Everlasting as well, but I just wanted to make note of that I've tried to cherry pick plants out that you would expect to do well in the Vancouver area. So I don't know how many people have cut and dried this plant before, but it makes the most beautiful. I can see Lorraine nodding there, so I think you have, but it makes such beautiful cut flowers. And you want to leave some, of course. You want it to go to seed, you want it for its wildlife value, but you can cut and hang it, and it looks exactly like it does in flower when it's dry. Like it's pretty unbelievable, and they last for a long time, and they have kind of this antique look to them. They're very neat flowers. So they are asters, but they have only the disc florets. They don't have the ray florets. So they're just all the little flowers are all clustered into the head there. And that's an up close photo of the flowers. So yarrow might be a plant that you're familiar with. You'll always see Lorquin's admirals nectaring on them. You'll always see birds. This is one of the woodland skippers, but they're a more vigorous growing plant. So planting them with other kind of vigorous growers like asters or goldenrod or pearly everlasting, like we looked at, are great companion plants with it. And it is a kind of taller, later flowering plant. So if you're looking for something in your garden to flower into the summer and early fall, this is a wonderful plant, and you're just guaranteed to have butterflies nectaring on those flowers. This is also a later flowering plant. So if you're walking the shoreline in Vancouver, you're sure to see some of these. Do you guys recognize these from beach walks? Yeah, I see nodding heads. And then you've probably noticed how late they bloom. So they can be, you know, from summer. I've seen weirdo blooms even in December, and they're just seem to always be going. And of course, eventually they are deciduous, so eventually they do die back, but they have a lot of blooms for a long time and are very nectar rich. And you'll see a diversity of pollinators on them. And they are a larger wildflower, so you almost like plant them in a garden, kind of like a small shrub in a way, because they get branchy and they kind of, the branches will kind of fall and can be even a little bit creeping, but they all will be flowering and they look just beautiful, and you'll have lots of wildlife at them. And there's a combo planting of the yarrow with the gumweed. So if you have a spot where you want some late pollinator friendly blooms, those are two that are great to plant together. Canada goldenrod, I'm sure you have seen that in your region. And just to dispel any misgivings about Canada goldenrod, it doesn't cause allergies. There's a lot of, because there's a lot of people have sort of comment, like I've heard that a lot before, where people think it gives them allergies, and there's been a lot of published scientific peer-reviewed studies that have shown that it doesn't cause allergies. Sometimes people say that it blooms at the same time as ragweed, and people misinterpret this one for providing allergies because it's so bright and they see it at the same time. And I've wondered if there's other wind pollinated species blowing pollen around while it's blooming, and people think that. But this isn't a wind pollinated plant with pollen blowing all over the place. It's an insect pollinated plant with heavy pollen, and is always covered in animals. Like out of all the plants, like this one, it might be the most unbelievable for just attracting bees and butterflies. It's really unbelievable and super well suited to your area. And it goes on to set seed and provide a great buffet for other wildlife. Usually the birds are there gleaning insects that are embedded into the seeds. I think they also gather nesting material from it sometimes, because it holds its seeds for so long. Sometimes they're even there like after the winter. But there's always a diversity of birds on the seed heads, and they have a nice beauty of their own regardless. So fireweed I put in this spot because it's such a good companion with the goldenrod. Both are tall and late blooming, and just really compatible growing together. And I also love the seeds of the fireweed. You can see them, the little specks inside the fluff there. And this is mixed meadow planting from seed, but with the last few plants that we just talked about. So you'll see the gumweed and the fireweed and the goldenrod and the yarrow. So if you were in Vancouver in an estuary, this is one that would certainly draw your eye. And if you've seen it before, you'd probably recognize it, but it's called Henderson's checker mallow. They're typically in brackish or salty water, but you can grow them in a garden setting. And in this picture, that's what they are. They're in just a patch, and there's no estuary here. It's just regular soil, fresh water, but it's like a stunning plant that has a bit of height to it. And thinking about what you might plant with something like that, I think some of the taller things that we've looked at that like a little more moisture, like the goldenrod, is a good example of that. And here's checker mallow with self-heal. So there's a non-native self-heal that's sometimes confused with this one, but this one is the native subspecies lanceolata with the lanceolate leaves instead of the fuzzier lower growing leaves that are kind of flush to the ground. And I'm always advocating for native grasses. So this tufted hair grass, Deschampsia sespatosa, this is the true native species, but you might recognize Deschampsia from kind of like garden centers and things like that. So this is one of the parent plants to the cultivar. And it's a big, beautiful, tufted bunch grass that's just super lovely that we use a lot in our rain garden plantings and wet meadow plantings and estuary restoration type work. But in a garden, you can use them all the same. Sometimes we put them in hedgerows between shrubs because they're just so big and beautiful. And this is sluice sedge, Carex obnupta. I wanted to just provide another example of grass-like things to think about for making your gardens diverse and interesting. This one has evergreen cover. So so does the tufted hair grass, but if you're looking for year-round cover, sluice sedge is a really good choice. And this is Helenium autumnale or mountain sneezeweed. It almost looks like an echinacea with the reflexed petals, and it blooms late, and it makes these clonal patches of taller wildflowers that bloom quite late, and they bloom for a long time. And the flowers are very large, as you can see. So for woodland plants, I just wanted to touch on some woodland favorites. A lot of what we've looked at prefers sun, but not all. I was kind of forgetting to mention that. So some of the things that we've looked at that are fine in shade or self-heal. So that was that purple one, and that can be in sun or shade. And nodding onion is fine in partial shade as well. So that would be a good example if you had a partial shade spot, but wanted to use some of the ones we just looked at. Those would be two really good ones. So in Vancouver, I'm sure in some of your forest hikes, you've seen fringe cup. So it's in the saxifrage plant family. They have whitish pink flowers. The leaves are beautiful through fall, much of the winter and spring, and then they go on to flower in these long stalks. And then in the late summer, they kind of die back. And then when it rains again, come back out, and they have these beautiful fringed flowers. The petals on the flowers are just really nice. And you'll see bees and you'll see hummingbirds at these. It's a nice way to draw wildlife into shady spots of your garden. And this is in the same plant family. Does anyone recognize that one? So it's the saxifrage plant family too. This one's called Alum Root. Oh, good. I see some people knew it already. So it's Alum Root, Heuchera macrantha, and the heucheras you also see even at like thrifties and stuff. Sometimes I see like the same genus of plants. They have beautiful foliage. You can just make out the mottled foliage, and they're a fabulous one for spots that have a little bit of drainage in the shade. So you'll naturally you see them growing in rock, and the leaves are gorgeous all through winter. Big dark green leaves with the mottling and the sort of purple venation. And then they set out these big stalks of small pinkish white flowers. And again, it's a way to get bees into the shady parts of your garden. And they're very nice along like paths and things like that. If you wanted to make a border of these plants, you'd have the foliage, and then at some times of year, they would put up these sprays of flowers. And again, just a reminder about the diversity of native grasses. So the native grasses aren't just for the sun, they're all over the forest too. So Columbia brome here is one of the common woodland grasses. So keep your eye out for this one in June and July. Big nodding heads that you'll see in the forest. And there's more woodland grasses than this, but it's just to take note of some of those plants and thinking of clever ways to use them in your plantings, even in the shade. So I'll bet you know this one is Columbine or Aquilegia. And we're on a bit of a hummingbird kick for a minute. I'm going to show you if you were doing a shady hummingbird garden, you would definitely put this Columbine in. Then you would put hedge nettle with these purple tubular flowers. They obviously look really good together. Like the colors are just in the same hue. And in the, they typically in the wild, I would say that the hedge nettle likes richer soils, but in a garden setting, I plant them together sometimes and they flower, they overlap with their flowering, and the hummingbirds will just go crazy. They just go from flower to flower to flower, hopscotching all over. So there's a hummingbird with mock orange, and they all flower at the same time, and it makes such a good patch for, you can get Anna's hummingbirds and Rufus hummingbirds going around there and they will come into the shadier areas if that's the kind of garden that you have, that's more or under against a home or something that's casting shade, or under a canopy. And the last hummingbird plant are these black twin berries that are common in the Vancouver area. So look out for these tubular yellow flowers that are going to be out soon. They don't stay, each flower doesn't stay in bloom very long, so you got to keep a watchful eye on them. The species name is Lonicera involucrata, and it's named after the involucra bract. That's the red here. So all this turns red, that's wrapped around the flowers. And then when they're pollinated, when they're fertilized, the fruit, of course, will form. And the two bell-shaped flowers the ovaries of those flowers mature into these spherical bluish black fruits that are not palatable to people, but the birds really like them. And the color combo is really nice, like that red with the blackish blue, and they can have abundant fruit on them and they grow quickly. And does anyone know what plant family might have these opposite leaves? And I had mentioned the species name there. They're the genus. So I see Dennis and Teresa, or Teresa had her hand raised. She had her hand raised because she knew. So she knows it's in the honeysuckle family. And I see Jennifer said that too. So yes, they're Caprifoliaceae, or the honeysuckle family. So like the other Lanisteras, like orange trumpet honeysuckle or hairy honeysuckle, the vines, or snowberry is another one from that family. And just a couple shrubs. So we just looked at the Lanistera, but hardhack in a garden is absolutely fabulous. And it's a great shrub instead of something like a lilac, to think about having these guys, and you'll get big swallowtail butterflies like the western tigers and pale swallowtails coming to these, and they bloom at the same time as the helenium that we looked at. So if you have a wet patch in the garden, that's a wonderful combination, a hedgerow or a fence line for some color and wildlife value. I love those two together. And if you're really feeling wildlife friendly, I would encourage you to allow for a back garden patch of nettles, or even a container or a pot of nettles, even if it's not in the ground, if you're worried about the stings on the nettles, because of just how butterfly friendly nettles are. So the pictures here are all butterflies that preferentially lay their eggs on nettle, and the red admirals and satyr anglewings and Milbert's tortoiseshell, the stinging nettle is the only plant they lay their eggs on, so they're obligate on it. So these are all butterflies that occur in your area, and that if you're interested in being a butterfly host, that stinging nettle would be a really good choice of a plant to plant. You could also think about ocean spray or willows. Those are also really good options for creating a butterfly friendly garden. So in the last slide, I just wanted to let you know about our Meadow Maker program. So this is a 7-month program that we're starting in April. There's still about 20 spots left before we're capping it off. And it's for people who are interested in learning more about how to make a meadow. And if you are interested, please visit our website. So I, just did a screenshot of part of the page there, but there's much more information about all the sessions. So there are 11 sessions. It does include 2 field trips, but it's just 2 field trips over that whole 7 months, and most of it is virtual. So if you were kind of interested in those meadow aspects we were talking about, this is a great one to be part of. We've partnered with Pollinator Partnership Canada with Laura Mirandin. So she's a bee biologist. So a lot of what we're going to do is bee identification and learning about the life histories and relationships between native plants and local pollinators. So that will be bees, and hopefully we can have my husband James talking about butterflies. I've just got to convince him. And yeah, for more information, please go take a look or send me an email and we can talk more about it.